Good morning, everybody. This is Morgan Denny, lead faculty for the Primary Care PT Division. This is the PT on Ice Daily Show coming to you from Portland, Oregon, where the weather has been charming. So today we're going to talk about blood pressure, telehealth, and tech. Is it working? So a study came out just earlier this week in JAMA that kind of looked at the effectiveness of home monitoring of blood pressure in patients versus standard care. So the article itself was entitled Effective Smartphone-Enabled Health Monitoring Devices versus Regular Follow-Up on Blood Pressure Control Among Patients After Myocardial Infarction, a Randomized Clinical Trial. Kind of a long name, but really says it all. So basically what they did is they took 200 people who had just had a heart attack, an MI, and they put them in one of two groups. The control group basically got 4 visits over the next year, just standard visits in an outpatient clinic to see if their blood pressure was being controlled. And in this study, they actually put the level of controlled at 139/89 or less as equaling controlled, which if you know blood pressure numbers, you know is not a great level of control, but in this study, that's what they used. So again, the control group had 4 visits, quarterly visits, over the year following their heart attack. And the intervention group basically were given a bunch of tech to take home to do self-monitoring. They were giving a home blood pressure unit, a single lead EKG unit, a weight scale, and a step counter. And all of these were attachable to their smartphone apps, basically. And then what happened is they had two clinic visits, and then 2 of their other clinic visits were replaced by telehealth visits or virtual visits, just like a lot of us as PTs have been doing. Now, and it is interesting because in the 200 patients and the different groups, you would think there'd be a lot of variety between each group and the patient populations, but they did a really good job in this study controlling for other underlying pathologies with numbers really evenly split. So what did they find? Actually, what I should tell you first is the authors of this study hypothesized that because patients with greater information and health education tend to do better with their blood pressure management, that the experimental group with all the toys and the data and the gadgets would have a greater rate of managed blood pressure, which again, as we said, in this study was deemed to be about 140/90 or lower, which is high, but all the same. So they basically thought that the people with all the tech, the ones with the information, would do significantly better at controlling their blood pressure at a year at the end of this study. So, drum roll please, what did they find? They actually found absolutely no significant difference between either group, which I thought was really interesting. And that actually comes in lots of different scores. So they found that both the control group and the intervention group, the group that had all the tech and blood pressure measurements and all that kind of stuff, they both had a 75% amount of the participants that had controlled blood pressure. And in both groups, the patient satisfaction level was exactly 82%. Like, not only no significant difference, but almost no difference across the board. The patients that were in the intervention group that had the tech actually had a 90% satisfaction rate on all the levels with the technology. And most of the dissatisfaction they actually found came from the fact that, like, technological difficulties, like, oh, I was going to my Zoom appointment and the link didn't open correctly or something like that. So just kind of those pieces. So their conclusions at the end of this study were that these findings suggest that smart technology yields similar percentages of patients with regulated blood pressure compared with the standard of care. Such an intervention is feasible in clinical practice and is accepted by patients. So I feel like this is really timely research, right? I mean, these experiments were started back in 2017 to get all this data. That is way before COVID-19 was even like a blip on our radars. So, but it really has a lot of presence now and a lot of important aspects and findings, right? So first off, I would say patients were equally satisfied with their telehealth visits versus their in-person visits. Now, I know that PT is different than someone going in to get their vitals and blood pressure and EKG taken, right? Like, I know it's different, but level of satisfaction was still high. There wasn't a dramatic difference in the group that didn't get in-person care or in-person education. And I think that as PTs, like, we really like to feel like everything needs to be in person because we are having such a dramatic effect on this human in front of us in many ways. But I think sometimes we need to step back, like bring our egos back a touch, and remember that in a lot of ways, patients can be just as satisfied with a virtual visit, with telehealth. So that's one finding from this study, right? The second piece really is that patients were able to successfully and accurately measure their blood pressure and all the other findings with technology, and then appropriately get them back to the hospital or that care provider. Now, again, I think as PTs, we need to keep this in mind. Like, this is a strategy that we could really be using right now. Like, we feel like we have all these specialized skills, and we do, but some of them are things that we can apply through our telehealth visits currently. For example, I feel like if you're doing a progress note on shoulder range of motion or on a shoulder patient with shoulder stuff, and you need a range of motion measurement, like, it's kind of hard to gauge over the internet, over the computer, exactly what that abduction level is. How much external rotation do they really have? But what about having your patient download any app that measures angular change on their smartphone and then show them how to place it on their arm and how to move their arm? Have them read that over the computer to you, right? There, I think, are a lot more things we can use via tech. And now that we know from this research that not only can we use them, but that patients can actually do a good job of accurately helping us to measure these things. So I think we need to really not discount our patients' abilities to step into this new role, but also just get a little bit more well-versed in the tech and also get comfortable using it and suggesting it to our patients. All right, but back to the blood pressure aspect of things. So one thing that this study did not address at all, but that I think is really important, is that in both the control group and the intervention group, 75% of the people had controlled blood pressure at the 1 year out mark, independent of virtual tech stuff versus inpatient or in-clinic kind of measures, right? So why did that other 25% fail? Like, why was their blood pressure not controlled at 1 year out? Was it, the medication wasn't correct? Was it the dosage didn't get monitored or modified appropriately? Is it that the patient wasn't consistent with the pharmaceutical treatment? Is it that this was a person that wasn't going to respond to pharmaceutical treatment, but that really needed lifestyle intervention? What was it, right? And I feel like as PTs, this is a place we really need to step up and step in. Like, we all know that blood pressure is super important to understanding general health and knowing where patients are at, right? Like, they always say blood pressure, silent killer, because you don't see the effects of having high blood pressure until it's too late. But these are people, and in this study it was post heart attack, but at the same time, like, these are people walking around and coming to our clinics all the time, pre or post heart attack. But what about those 25%? Those are probably people that needed us to talk about nutrition and activity, exercise. This is our wheelhouse, decreasing stress, improving sleep, all of the things that as primary care PTs we need to be better at, right? Like, so we need to be stepping up into this role and getting to those 25% of people that aren't responding to pharmaceuticals and that kind of treatment strategy, right? We need to be able to get better at these things. For sure. I mean, the reason we do an entire lecture on blood pressure in our primary care PT course is really because we know how integral it is to understanding those numbers and how we can do exercise. And while this study looked at blood pressure measures at home, we need to take that also and say, why am I not asking my patients via telehealth to do blood pressure? There are patients I had when I was in the clinic that I would always ask to measure their own blood pressure at home before coming to the clinic. And then we would monitor it in the clinic with exercise, etc., so that we had accurate readings about what the patient's body was doing, not only that morning or in that one moment, but as the day progressed, right? And also to make sure that their blood pressure unit was working correctly and dialed in. But now that we're doing telehealth, there are still patients that I ask to measure their blood pressure before we begin the session, during the session, after the session. Like, this isn't a piece of treatment that we should let go of. It's something that we need to, again, embrace technology and trust our patients to help us with some of these measures, because these are very interesting times. And while currently treatment is very, very different and may be in the future, we need to get better at addressing some of this stuff and not leave some of those tests and measures behind that are really important to us, but just find different ways to do them. And whether that means using things that our patients already have at home, getting braver about suggesting people buy things like, I think you should buy a home blood pressure unit because I think it's really important for you to monitor. Or I think you need to download this free app on your smartphone to help me measure how much your elbow or shoulder is moving. Any of these things can be really appropriate, and I think patients are very open to them. We as PTs just need to get better at stepping into that space and remembering that while there are a lot of parts of physical therapy that, like the hands-on piece and the in-person piece and the delivery of energy and connection, like all that stuff will never be replaced. But right now, we need to know that there are some pretty good stand-ins, and we need to get better at using them and adapting them to our current setting. So, that said, in review, remember to use your tech, check your patient's blood pressure, because you never know who's going to have hypertension or hypotension for that matter, not to mention who's going to be in that group of people that really need the one-on-one education and consistent monitoring, which PTs are great at, right? So remember that and stay strong in these very, very interesting times. And that said, the song of the day, which I found to be very entertaining and put a smile on my face, is called Stay Home by Big and Rich. And I'll post it on the Facebook blog just below this post so that there's a link to it. Have a great day out there, everybody, and I hope this info helps you out.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to the PT on Ice Daily Show. If you enjoyed this content, head on over to iTunes and leave us a review. And be sure to check us out on Facebook and Instagram at the Institute of Clinical Excellence. If you're interested in getting plugged into more ICE content on a weekly basis while earning CEUs from home, check out our virtual ICE online mentorship program at ptonice.com. While you're there, sign up for our Hump Day Hustling newsletter for a free email every Wednesday morning with our top 5 research articles and social media posts that we think are worth reading. Head over to ptonice.com and scroll to the bottom of the page to sign up.